Just step by step, right? The Muslim Brotherhood, again, is this British intelligence creation. In the years of Nasser, now Nasser had many positive features. Nasser was building infrastructure on a tremendous scale. That Aswan High Dam is an example of the infrastructure that builds a nation. Otherwise, they would be having floods. Now they've got flood control, they've got hydroelectric, they've got a whole series of advantages, right? The Nile, of course, being the center of the country. In terms of the awareness now, there's a very interesting statement from Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, and he says, I've been on the telephone with Colonel Gaddafi of Libya and with President Assad of Syria, and they briefed me on the U.S. meddling in Egypt. And he says, I find this sickening. I find it shameful that they betray their ally. And then he adds, that's how the devil pays you. So now all the U.S. client states in the Middle East have to wonder, what good is an alliance with the U.S.? It's not worth anything, and that's going to, I think, increase the ability of Saudi Arabia. We know that there was an attempt by Bandar, right? Prince Bandar wanted to open to Russia in a significant way, and then that seemed to have been shut down. I would look for people in Algeria, people in Saudi Arabia, to get on the phone, and indeed Mubarak, right? If I were Mubarak, I'd be on the phone with Putin, I'd be on the phone with who? In China, I'd be on the phone. So
this is a desperate gamut, but so I go back to that, as you started to allude to. What is Jordan thinking? What is Saudi Arabia thinking when the globalist-run Muslim Brotherhood, on record, who our media uses to take our liberties away in the name of the threat, it's a multi-faced coin or a Swiss Army knife they use for every crisis. This proto-Al-Qaeda. They've got proto-Al-Qaeda threatening all these globalist/Israeli allies. I mean, that's got to be a wake-up call to them, especially if this fails in Egypt.
Yes, and for Egypt especially, the big vulnerability of Egypt is wheat. They are dependent on imported food, in particular the question of bread. Now, they have a system which is very good, which is a system of subsidies for the bread price. They keep bread cheap as a means of maintaining social and governmental stability. Obviously now, Wall Street has been beating up the world price of wheat. There's been a huge upward spike in the bread price. And
stay there. And then they're following the Twitter and the social networks. They know the Egyptians are ripe to rebel because they've got empty bellies. In comes El Baradei from the UN. Oh, I will save you. Oh. I mean, how obvious is this? We'll be right back, Webster Tarpley. I just can't believe how treacherous this is, though. Continuing here, Webster, I'm really having trouble dealing with this because if you go back to last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I knew that WikiLeaks was connected to Tunisia. I knew that was a staged event. It was admitted by the West it was. But then I looked at Mubarak, this servant who did everything he was told, the torture centers, the black sites, Westerners being flown in to be tortured there, Israel worshiping him, Netanyahu, saying what buddies they are, the people there revolting against him, seeing him, as a U.S./Israel puppet, and then to do this to him, if they were unsuccessful, it just shows that there's no honor among these people, even amongst their own thieves and dictators. But then they came out and bragged that El Baradei was their man from the UN, and that they had engineered this, and they were actually proud of it. I mean, it does smack of desperate actions, and that is really scary to know that they're really trying to overthrow and destabilize Saudi Arabia. I mean, what does Jordan think of this? To now have the Muslim Brotherhood, openly run by the West, charging around, threatening people. I mean, are they trying to set off World War III here, Webster?
Well, I think it's a phase change of world history. If the destabilization of Egypt had succeeded, and I don't think it will at this point, this would have been the triumph of the empire, the crushing of the nation-state everywhere, starting with the Arab world, a huge world hysteria, the destruction of many, many nations, and the emergence of an overarching world empire in the form of the international.
Because they would trigger these rebellions everywhere and then roll in with their revolutionaries, and globalist flags would be hauled up in even more nations.
Right, and and that's the issue. Now, I don't think this will happen now, at least not in that form. It's a huge defeat for the U.S. because they came out, and as Chavez and Gaddafi and Assad have all noted, they essentially were out there shooting the works for destabilization of Egypt, right? It's a vabanque, right? A double or nothing play, right? Let's
a Hail Mary.
The ranch on destabilization.
A Hail Mary.
Yeah, there you go. And I don't think it's working. It's running out of steam. They have no color. They have no slogan. They have no leader. They have no TV. They have no internet. The police and the army remain loyal. They don't have working people with them because these people are not credible, right?
And now Mubarak has said this is a foreign conspiracy.
Yes, right. And Baradei jets in from his apartment in Vienna, where he spends his time with his money from the Soros-Brzezinski International Crisis Group, right, who were part of the action in Tunisia. And this is simply not credible. Now, Moody's today has downgraded Egypt. Now, this is the Wall Street attack. If you look at the internal arrangements in Egypt, what does Wall Street care about in a place like Egypt? Obviously, they want to attack the bread subsidy because this will lead to tremendous instability. When the U.S. says they want to, revise or review the aid posture, right, the $1.5 billion or $3 billion, depending on how you count it, that Egypt gets every year, at the heart of this is money to buy food on the world market.
And by the way, none of this is your opinion. In the IMF, World Bank, Exim Bank documents we've gotten off and on the last 30 years, the biggest data dump, 2002, they admit they go in to third world countries and say, we'll give you loans, but get rid of subsidies. And behind the scenes, they're rubbing their hands together going, get our takeover revolution ready. We'll really loot them now. I mean, they know what they're doing. They're trying to set the atmosphere. They're trying to set the table for this, clearly trying to destabilize the Middle East.
Right. A lot of people in this demonstration are the rich elitists of Cairo North. In other words, the comfortable middle class and up, people who have the internet and who care about Twitter and the rest of this stuff. When they say economic reform, that generally means destroy the subsidies, free market, right? Free market, free trade, globalization, the reign of international finance capital and all the rest of it. The response from Mubarak to all this, and let me just say, Moody's says the reason they're downgrading Egypt's debt is that they're afraid that Mubarak will increase social expenditure, have a higher minimum wage, increase the food subsidies, this sort of thing, and they don't want this. Therefore, they want to have a speculative run on the Egyptian pound and on Egyptian government debt. So he's going to have to respond with protectionist measures of his own. The obvious thing for Mubarak to do is raise the minimum wage, get the price of bread and cooking oil and fuel down, kick out the International Monetary Fund, declare a debt moratorium, and then what are the resources of Egypt? Well, you got the Nile. Okay, the Aswan High Dam is there. Give the Nile the full Tennessee Valley Authority treatment. What else do you have? The Suez Canal. Suez Canal still has 8% of world trade. Why not widen it? Why not make that 10%, 15%, collect some tolls, and get the people working? Because the other big thing, of course, is unemployment. Well, we have, pretty good, we have about 22, 23% unemployment here. In reality, Spain has 20%. We just saw the Spanish foreign minister at the European Union meeting saying, we stand with the people in the streets. Yeah,
right.
As long as it's...
Before we get into the wider field, Webster, I want to go back to this area. Is this not a fleeing forward? The globalists knew that there might have been an actual democratic move against Mubarak, their old puppet, so they went ahead and triggered this now.
I don't see any organized opposition. As I say, the one group that stands out is this April 6th, and this is basically a group of NATO agents, right? They've taken over the same paraphernalia as the CIA was using in Belgrade and Serbia 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. So I don't see any real movement. There is no organized force. In a country like this, the policy alternative would almost have to emerge from inside the ruling party. Somebody interested in actual economic reform, which would not mean IMF, World Bank, Wall Street.
Webster,
City.
I want to go to some phone calls here on this subject, as I promised to. But before we do that briefly, give us your synopsis of what you believe is going to play out, what the general ramifications of this are going to be, in the Middle East, in North Africa, into the rest of the Mediterranean, and then other movements you see around the world with the Soros-run gang calling for $100 trillion in additional banker bailouts to then leverage out to 59.9% credit card bills for the general public. What do you see happening when Ireland has this election, the move towards the EU falling apart? I mean, this is a desperate move, and just studying this, I see a lot of evidence that the New World Order is actually in deep trouble.
Well, I would say just on Egypt specifically, right? Today, the demonstrators, I call them the nihilists because I think that's what they are. Today, the demonstrators have called for a general strike. Now, they don't talk about this too much. The banks and other businesses are closed, but that was already announced during the weekend, and it's just part of the sort of attempt to cool down Cairo. So I don't know. They seem to be calling also for another general strike tomorrow. And above all, tomorrow they say they want to have a 1 million-man march. Well, we will see. And remember, watch out for those camera angles, right? If they're going to claim a 1 million-man march, we want to see the whole thing. We want to see an oceanic crowd. I don't think you're going to see it, not in this form. The other thing is that one of these groups has put out an ultimatum to the Egyptian army saying, we want to see which side you're on. Well, that sounds like something pretty desperate. Now, the awareness of the color revolution, of the techniques of this thing, I think has grown to the point where it's going to be increasingly harder to have more color revolutions, CIA, people power coups, postmodern putsches in these other countries. Algeria, big oil producer; Syria, very, very critical place; Russian naval base there; Jordan, always an important country; so forth. Libya, also oil. I think it's going to be harder and harder for the Anglo-American intelligence to organize this kind of thing in those countries. Now, that would obviously mean then a growth of other influence: Chinese, Russian, Brazilian, and perhaps also more independence on the part of countries like Turkey, which have been chafing under.
And we're already seeing that. Let me interject this. Again, last week, I know the Egyptians have reasons to be angry. I don't like Mubarak. But I, even last week, couldn't believe that the West, that these banking interests are this ruthless and this backstabbing to one of their own henchmen. But now, Tarpley, you're proven right again. It's completely admitted that they're doing this, and clearly they didn't just go after Egypt because it's one of the most populous in the region, but because it was one of the only countries that they've got their minions in, so that they could try to trigger a domino to fall. Could it be it was the only domino that they really thought that they could push over? And if it does fall over, will that signify the fall of Saudi Arabia, the fall of Jordan? I mean, those countries have got to be reassessing their deals they've made with the central bankers.
Yes, in the meantime, look at what happened in Sudan. The Anglo-Americans have been trying to bust up Sudan for decades, and they claim now that they've succeeded with this referendum, that the southern Sudan will secede from the north. I don't know what the reality is on the ground, but these are the reports, that the referendum in favor of independence has won. It's unofficial, but there it is. This is, of course, that has nothing to do with human rights. It's because there's oil in the south, and the central government in Khartoum had been making deals with China. And, of course, the whole U.S. posture is use the human rights story to kick the Chinese out. Use any story. Use al-Qaeda. Use anything you can to kick the Chinese out. So, therefore, if Egypt falls, this would essentially mean a domino tsunami of destabilizations across North Africa, the Arab world, far beyond. It would probably spell the end of Pakistan as a centralized country. It would begin to reach into Iraq, into Iran, right? Because the Bernard-Lewis plan, as it's called, foresees the Balkanizations, the carving of all of these places, right? 3 Iraqs, 5 or 6 Irans, Lebanon carved, Egypt gets carved, Sudan being carved.
So they're going for that Balkanization along religious and racial lines, but as you said, it's not going well for them anywhere. What does this signify? That the banking empire, using the U.S., Israel, England, and others as muscle, is finally stuck in the mud, like Napoleon in Russia or Hitler in Russia or Barbarossa?